Good morning. My name is Erin Laura. I am the Associate Director of the Grants Financial Management Division, and I will let Suhaila introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Suhaila Lasky, and I am a co-team lead with the Grants Financial Management Division.
Today, you're going to have a different type of presentation than what you may have had in the past from the Grants Financial Management Division. It's not about the administration piece of your grants. We'll get further down that into your new grantee orientation. However, this is about resolving grants financial management findings and how the Office on Violence Against Women Grants Financial Management Division is assisting our recipients in resolving those types of findings, as well as things that you can implement internally so that those findings don't happen to you. We do ask that this be more of a conversation type of presentation. If you have any questions throughout the entire presentation, you can either put it in a chat box and Suhaila will answer it. There will be time for Suhaila to read those questions and the responses, so you don't have to monitor the chat box and you can just stay present in our presentation. We hope this is something that's helpful for you, giving you a little bit more insight on what the Office on Violence Against Women does in resolution of these types of findings that our recipients could have throughout the life cycle of their award. As I said earlier, I am Erin Laura, and Suhaila Lasky is with me. We are only two of almost 15 Grants Financial Management Division staff to include our audit resolution team. If there is anything that you need in terms of questions, please ask us, give us a call, or send us an email. This isn't the only time you'll have access to us. We are there every single day from 7:30 in the morning to 4:30 in the afternoon. So please call, email us for anything and everything related to the financial management of your OVW award. The next couple slides, we're going to get into the different type of financial reviews. There are financial reviews that relate to your internal audit, Office of Inspector General, OIG reviews, and financial monitoring. In our new grantee orientation, we always tell our recipients that the name of the review is one thing, but ultimately the end goal is still the same. It's looking at your organization as well as the implementation of your OVW grant program from a programmatic and financial aspect. I am sure you guys are all very familiar with the three reviews that are on the screen right now. It's the Office of Inspector General audits. Those are performed internally by the Office of Inspector General. Who is picked for those type of audits? We don't know. OIG does their own selection of those audits and they never share it. Not only do our own recipients receive those audits, but the Office on Violence Against Women receives them as well. They look at our management from a federal perspective. So not only do our recipients get them the audits, OVW gets them too, because they still need to make sure we're doing our part in managing all of our awards. A single audit. This is done by an independent auditor and is only required when a recipient expends over $1 million in federal expenditures in their fiscal year. This is a new threshold increase due to the Uniform Guidance update. That is just one of those reviews, but it could also be in coordination with your financial statement audit. The single audit portion of it takes a little bit further into your financial statement audit because it looks at the management of your federal grant programs and the policies and procedures in accordance with the Uniform Guidance. Financial monitoring. On the slide, it says it is currently performed by the Department of Justice, but starting in fiscal year 2025, OVW completes the financial monitoring for all of our discretionary awards. However, we are working in coordination with the Office of Justice Programs to monitor state agencies in an effort to reduce the burdens on our recipients. No matter who is completing the financial monitoring, the review looks the same. We're looking at your internal policies and procedures, the submission of your required reports, how you are working on the grant program in accordance with your approved budget. None of the formula grant programs have to get an approved budget, but there are a lot of discretionary awards that our formula grantees still have. So we're looking at your award from start to finish and to see how you're managing it. Financial monitoring is a type of review to help our recipients to ensure they have policies and procedures in place to provide technical assistance and to assist in the resolution of any items identified as part of that review. As I was saying earlier, the reviews all have different names, but the basis of it is exactly the same. They're going to go in, ask you for your policies and procedures, then ask you, are you following them? They may take a sample of your general ledger for a particular cost and take it through the life cycle of your process to make sure that you're actually doing what is written. Is it written? That's probably one of the biggest findings of the reviews is that policies and procedures aren't written down. And at a state level, a lot of these come down directly from the state. So they are written, but are they up to date? Are they accurate in how you're doing business today? The reviews also look at your approved budget, but then they look at the actual cost incurred because for all of our discretionary grant programs, when you submit your application or you get approval of that budget, it's just that, a budget. There's no way to know at the beginning of your award what you're going to be spending the money on in 3 years. That is why there is some discretion of being able to move some of those costs around. But as a recipient, you still have to keep track of those actual costs. So if you move between a certain threshold, you have to get approval through a grant award modification. Those reviews also look to determine if there's excess cash on hand. OVW does this on a quarterly basis. We'll pull a report from Just Grants and look at all of the federal financial reports that were submitted for that. So, for example, 12/31/2024, we'll go in and see how much funds have been drawn down for a particular grant. If you've drawn down more than what you've expended for that reporting period, we'll reach out to our recipients to try and get a little bit more information. There might be a reason why you drew down a little bit more to meet payroll costs, or you had to reimburse more of your subrecipients in the first 2 weeks after that quarter ended. So it's an automatic, hey, it appears that you have excess cash on hand, but it's a conversation because we don't know what you need to do during the lifetime of your award. Every single state has a different life cycle for their subgrants. Your subrecipients might be submitting for reimbursement monthly. Some of them might be submitting quarterly. So your reimbursement from OVW may look different. So having a conversation with our recipients is huge because we don't automatically assume, hey, why are you drawing down more than you're reporting? And assume that you have excess cash. We reach out, get an explanation to get confirmation. I'm not going to say that there isn't a time that recipients have to return money to us, but it's usually justified and understandable in the terms of the amount of money that was drawn down. So all of these financial reviews, like I said, are called one or three different types of things, but they all look at the same thing. This next slide shows what we have determined to be the most common findings. And if you've seen our new grantee orientation presentation, they are exactly the same. No matter how long we've been doing our orientation, I have been with OVW since 2010, and the common findings are still the same. There are only 6 bullets, but these are all repeated financial findings we have seen over the years. Lack of documentation. This one, I wish we could just bold it because I can't stress this enough that documenting your information, your invoices, your receipts now is so much easier than having to document it in 3 years from now. You need to get the documentation to support all your expenditures, or you have to have a mechanism to monitor that the reimbursements are accurate and in line with the program. Timesheets. As recipient, are you keeping track of the time charged directly to the grant program? Reporting of your federal financial reports. Your expenditures that you're reporting quarterly should match the cumulative amount that's included in your general ledger. Policies and procedures. I've said this before, just because you know or you have the training to do it in a certain way, in order to confirm that it's being done, it has to be written. So, what if I was doing a process for the past 13 years and I decided to win the lottery and retire? I wouldn't mind winning the lottery. I don't think anyone would mind. But what if I just left and I didn't document what I needed to do on a daily basis? Michael and Suhaila would be like, what? What do we have to do? I'm just using this as an example. This is just to say it needs to be documented to ensure you're doing what you're supposed to do. Budget modifications from a state perspective. I know that this is a formula grant program. You don't have to submit budget modifications to us, but it's still an issue. This also applies to when you're monitoring your subrecipient, because remember, our relationship is with you as the direct recipient. And a majority of the funds are passed down and subawarded out to your subrecipients. Do they have documents, policies, procedures? How are they reporting their expenditures to you? Do they have documentation on hand? Are they supporting the work that they're doing? How are they reporting their progress? All of this plays a part in our relationship of the goals and objectives of your OVW grant program. The prior slide listed out the most common financial monitoring and audit recommendations. This slide shows what those findings could result in. They are the most egregious of them all. We'd like to highlight them though, because although they are more serious in nature, they have all happened. And I'll have to tell you, every single one of these has happened in my 15 years at OVW. This is the last thing we ever want our recipients to have handed to them or to do. We had one grantee's OIG audit and they questioned their personnel cost. And from a budget perspective, looking at the award, personnel is about 80% of that budget. That might be on the higher end, but it's a lot of money. And this recipient didn't keep timesheet. There were over $600,000 of question cost because they weren't able to support it. So it was deemed unallowable. They didn't have to return $600,000. And we'll go into a little bit more about the resolution process and what we had to do to work with them to get it resolved. They ended up having to return money, but not the entire $600,000. And we don't want that to happen to our recipients. So that's why we're here to help you so you don't have to do that. As well as working with our recipients, like I said before, without you and the federal government, the success of our programs wouldn't be there. The end goal of everything is the success of our grant programs. Potentially, a recipient could be placed on the Department of Justice high risk list as a result of those findings. This doesn't stop you from getting additional funding within the Department of Justice, but it does put additional award conditions on your award. You may have to draw down on a reimbursement basis that goes through many levels of review within the department. Your funds could be put on hold. Potentially, we'd have to terminate the award, and that's something we don't want to do. These reviews, and I'll have to say, looking at this last bullet, it has happened and it's led to an OIG investigation. However, we try to provide as much training as possible and provide as much technical assistance to our recipients so that that does not happen. Okay, Suhaila has a comment.
Thank you. So this is Suhaila, and I just wanted to pause for a second. We haven't had any questions come in yet, but I do want to encourage everybody. If you have something that you want to share, an experience that you had, or highlight anything that you might have experienced in carrying out your grants and having a financial visit or being audited or any of these things that we're talking about, I really encourage you to go ahead and put your comments in the chat. Or if you want to raise your hands and talk as well, whatever method you want to use, feel free to chime in. And we'd really like to hear your perspective on this as well. One thing I did want to highlight that Erin mentioned, and I think that it was a really important thing that she said, was that when she mentioned that these same principles, these things that we're talking about, making sure that there's supporting documentation and that there are policies and procedures, that they don't only apply to the direct recipients who we're speaking to right now, right? But you want to carry those through. And when you're training your subrecipients, or when you're having conversations with them, when you're issuing these subawards, these apply to any recipients of federal funds. So even if you think that, like, okay, I'm doing a really great job, and that's super and makes us happy to hear, because you subaward so many funds out, it's also good to reinforce these same principles when working with your subrecipients.
This is Erin speaking. Thank you, Suhaila. That's a very good addition. And we do talk during our subrecipient presentation a little bit more about the subrecipient monitoring. But just taking that into consideration is huge because we're all part of the process, and 80% of your funds are subawarded out. So please ask the questions. If you don't feel comfortable in potentially using your name or your organization to share your experience with any of the above, you could send Suhaila a message, a private message, and we'll keep it private. This is a new presentation that when we developed it, we got really excited because this isn't something we've done before, but it's something to highlight. Instead of always thinking of the bad things, we are talking about ways we are involved as the Department of Justice and giving you an idea of how we can help you. So raise your hand, chime in, but I will tell you the next couple of slides are real findings. They are findings from financial monitoring. They are findings from single audits as well as OIG audits. So it's a kind of to show the real life version of the reviews instead of me just speaking to you about it. It gives a little bit more perspective that it's not just a, hey, this can happen. It's a, this has happened. And this is what we would do to help you resolve it. But also, what can we do to help you not get this type of recommendation? Okay. So, as I was saying earlier, as the Department of Justice, we are involved in all of the reviews, but the level is very different. And the reason why I say that is because for an OIG audit, my team, they are there from the start. OIG identifies that who they're going to audit for that fiscal year. They talk with OVW, they set up an entrance conference with you as the recipient, as well as the OVW audit liaison. They are there from start to finish of your OIG audit. Financial monitoring. Since we are completing our own monitoring now, if there are any recommendations and or findings, we will work directly with you, the recipient, during the resolution process to implement any identified corrective actions. For single audits, this is coordinated with the Office of Inspector General, although it's done by an independent auditor. If there are any recommendations related to your federal awards, the cognizant agency is designated to resolve and close out all the recommendations. Currently, the Office of Justice Programs is the point of contact for resolving any of the single audits related to the Department of Justice grant making component. But they are doing the exact same thing that we are doing in terms of resolving any of your OIG audits, as well as any of your financial monitoring recommendations. What do we do for all of these reviews? Because They are not different. I cannot stress this enough. Although the people doing the work are different, the end result is the same. We help review policies and procedures. One of the OIG audits, and I think I may have put that recommendation in this presentation, was our recipient, and they did not have policies and procedures in place to monitor their subrecipient. So I went back through to see if they had a recent financial monitoring visit, and they did. It was also noted as a recommendation as a result of that financial monitoring visit. So the grantee now has to develop stronger policies and procedures for more in-depth policies and procedures related to subrecipient monitoring. How are they picking their monitoring? Who are they going to monitor? How often are they going to monitor them? If there are any question cost, any unallowable cost, we will actually review the source documentation to either confirm that the costs are allowable, unallowable, or questioned, and we'll work with you. Do you need to get additional documentation? We'll try to figure out a way to resolve that recommendation. How about you call the hotel and get a copy of a receipt if you are missing a receipt for a travel reimbursement? Just because you don't have it right now, it doesn't mean there isn't a way for you to get it. We work with you directly to resolve it because remember, although these are just audits, their reviews or monitoring visits, we still want to make sure that you're doing what you need to do. Because remember, the end goal is to be able to complete the goals and objectives of the OVW grant program. This last bullet is kind of encompassing of the final piece of that resolution. We will get all of the documentation necessary and we'll work with either OIG, the recipient, and say, this is sufficient, OVW approves this. And we'll work to try to close out the reviews. Although we may not be doing the reviews themselves, we are very much integrated in the process. But we are in the process at different times. Okay, Suhaila, do we have any questions? And I think the next couple of slides are where we go into the specific. I hope you guys are finding this presentation to be informative.
Hi, this is Suhaila. So while we wait for all the people to start raising their hands or putting their questions in the chat box right now, I did want to highlight one of the things you just said during this last little piece, Erin. Basically, that we will work with our grantees and the auditors to resolve these findings because our ultimate goal, like Erin said, is to ensure that these funds are used to support your goals and the objectives of your project to do good things in your community. The whole crux of this presentation is really to talk about what our involvement is in that process and that we are a resource and we are here and it's part of what we do. We want to make sure as well that you know that we are able to assist with closing out findings and helping where and when we can. So I didn't get any questions there yet. However, I know we're getting into the interesting part soon. But in the meantime, I did want to tell one joke. And if anybody wants to put an answer into the chat box, we'd love to make sure that your keyboards are working. So please go ahead and put your response in the chat box. This one came from my 4-year-old who laughed hysterically when he didn't even say the joke right. So it is, why did the banana go to the doctor?
I don't know.
All right, we'll check the chat box. Tamika just said, because he split. Yep. I have a couple that came in as direct messages, like because he wasn't peeling well, or he had a splitting headache. Well, those are fantastic, guys. Thank you. Well, according to my 4-year-old, it's because he wasn't peeling well. But I really appreciate all the other answers that are coming through. He didn't feel appealing. That's a cute one. So this is a really good one, guys. Thank you.
This is Erin speaking. Suhaila, I actually got a direct question that I will ask. I will read an answer and then maybe you can put it into the chat. I can copy and paste it for you. The question is, and it's a really good question, and a lot of our state agencies are asking this. Should source documentation always be provided by the subrecipient before reimbursement is processed? That is a great question. And you might have to come to the subrecipient monitoring presentation where we'll talk more about it. And we go into a lot more depth for that type of question. But I wanted to address a little bit here. I don't want to say that source documentation is always required. And the reason I'm saying that is there's a caveat to that. When you go through the subrecipient application process, you're required to complete a pre-award risk assessment of all of your applicants. This is a requirement in the uniform guidance. As part of that assessment, you are supposed to look at the risk that an applicant or subrecipient poses, policies and procedures, past experience for sub awards, audits. There are a lot of things that you will review that will determine your level of monitoring for that particular subrecipient if they're awarded. That also is identifying the amount of source documentation that is required. I know there are other agencies, federal agencies out there that will say you have to get every piece of source documentation submitted to you before you reimburse a cost for your subrecipient. I can't say that's wrong for all subrecipients because there are some subrecipients who risk is just to just reimburse them. It's really too high. You have to get more source documentation based on the review that you did pre-award. But there are some subrecipients that for which you may not need to get that source documentation every reimbursement because when you monitor them, they have to have that on file and you'll review all of that documentation as part of your monitoring of those subrecipients. So this is where your policies and procedures will come into play and determine the level of source documentation that's required. You might have a standard reimbursement request for your subrecipients that everyone has to do, but depending on the assessment that you did pre-award, certain subrecipients may have to provide more documentation. Remember, all subrecipients have to keep the documentation on file, but potentially not all of them will have to submit that documentation for every single reimbursement. Because think about the level of review that you will need to do to make sure that all of those costs are allowable. How many subrecipients do you have? How long is it going to take you to review those requests? How often is a subrecipient requesting for reimbursement? Is it monthly, quarterly? The amount of source documentation submitted. So I don't want to say no, you don't have to get source documentation ever because it depends. It depends on the subrecipient, the risk assessment of that subrecipient, and your internal monitoring policies and procedures. How many times are you going to go out to visit that subrecipient? That might play a part as well. I pretty much said everything I say in that subrecipient pass-through presentation, but I hope that it gives you a little bit more of an understanding of the source documentation required from subrecipients. If you have any additional questions, you can send me another message or Suhaila as well, because it all depends. But at the end of the day, it's also based on your policies, procedures, comfort level. And I don't want to say comfort level to say that everyone has to do it, but I know that there are some of our STOP and SAS recipients have been told by other components that you need every piece of source documentation just submitted before you can reimburse your subrecipients. That is not my interpretation of the uniform guidance. So thank you for the question. I appreciate it. This is where the conversation happens. You're asking questions. We're talking about the financial management resolution of findings and recommendations, but it does lead to these additional questions because it all plays a part, because it could all be a finding. Okay, somebody was saying that they're interested in hearing more about question costs not always being required to be repaid.
This is Suhaila speaking. That's a really good question. Actually, the very next slide is going to talk about the different types of qualifications for findings. So if something is a question cost, or if something is unallowable, or if it's unsupported, and we'll talk about the different types, like how they'll classify things. One example might be if something was a questioned cost, if it was required to get prior approval and you didn't, then you would work with OVW to obtain retroactive approval if it's something that isn't allowable, but you just didn't get authorization or prior approval during that period that you should have. So that's an example. Erin, did you want to add to that at all?
This is Erin speaking. No, thank you for that question. That was our thought process because when you read an OIG audit report, you see all of those things and trying to understand the differences because there are three different things that could be intertwined and very confusing to understand. So that's a really good question. I do not have anything else to add to that.
This is Suhaila speaking. That was a very good question. Okay, so from the same person, they're currently working with their subrecipients to get their written policies and procedures in line with requirements. And would it be inappropriate for the direct recipient to provide their subrecipients with sample policies to help them understand what's needed? So, as long as you're confident that there are sufficient policies and procedures, I don't think it would be inappropriate, but I probably would make sure I'm pretty confident with what I give them if it's going to be an example. Erin?
This is Erin speaking. And to add, the organizations might be different. When I speak to a lot of the questions that we ask for our discretionary grantees, some of them are very small nonprofit. This might be their first ever federal award. We do recommend that they reach out to other organizations that are similar in size because the size of your organization plays a part in the type of policy and procedure you have to write and the level of reviews that go through certain, some of the coalitions potentially only have two people working because they're a small DV or SA coalition. And the internal controls of opening up the mail, depositing checks, etc. You need to have those fully documented. I would strongly recommend you use the uniform guidance as a basis. It's very in depth, there's a lot in there. And especially because they do have federal funds, albeit pass through, it's still federal funds. So it does need to be in line with the uniform guidance.
This is Suhaila. So as far as what I have received so far, Erin, it looks like we're current on questions. Oh, yep, we're current on questions. Thank you.
This is Erin speaking. I did get a direct message and I wanted to apologize. I'm usually really good about spelling out acronyms before I use them. And so going further, I will make sure that I spell it out, then give you the acronym. As a federal employee, I believe there are acronyms for everything that we do, and we do use them without thinking. So I apologize. And we can give you an acronym answer for an earlier reference. Suhaila, I said FFR, and it's the Federal Financial Reports. So going forward, I'll definitely spell it out versus giving you the acronym to begin with.
This is Suhaila. Oh, there's one more question. Is there an acronym list on the Office on Violence Against Women's website?
This is Erin speaking. I do not believe there is an acronym list. However, the financial guide does have an acronym list at the back of it that incorporates all the acronyms for the grants financial administration that we use in terms of the FFR. It would spell out the federal financial report. I do believe it spells out the Office of Inspector General, OIG, because there's a section in there about fraud, waste, and abuse. If you want, Suhaila, can you add the link to the Department of Justice financial guides so that you guys can have it? And then someone just said that they always provide sample OVW policies to subrecipients to help guide them with policy developments. And I think Suhaila was saying, we're not saying don't. Sometimes it's the only thing you have. As being OVW, we do have examples of policies and procedures. We don't endorse them because we can't, but we could give you ideas of what it should look like. But we always speak back to the uniform guidance and how it plays a part in your federal grant.
This is Suhaila. I think, Erin, one of the important things that you mentioned in support of that same topic is that it's all relative. Every policy and procedure, it's going to be very relative to that organization, their size, their budget, the number of staff, all of it. Their internal controls are going to look different, their checks and balances are going to look different. So there's no one size fits all. And I think that to reinforce that, there's going to be a lot of nuance with the different policies and procedures for different types of organizations and sizes and stuff like that. So that was it.
This is Erin speaking. Perfect. That was an amazing conversation, even though it was done via chat. One day, when we're back in person, we'll be able to have this conversation in person. We did get our first request for in-person new grantee orientation, and both Suhaila and I got excited because we really like to talk with our recipients in person. It gives this type of work more meaning, being able to speak with you one-on-one, because sometimes you don't want to ask a question in front of 150 people. So thank you. Suhaila, I can read the question, or Susanna said that this conversation is super helpful right now, and that I'm currently working with a subgrantee who is looking for approval of their policies and procedures. And I'm trying to communicate with them what you just both articulated so well. So she thanked us. Thank you. Okay. The next part of the conversation in the presentation, oh, thank you, Susanna. I'm so glad that it's helpful. We hope that this is helpful for other people as well, just having that conversation. The next few slides, we don't have that many slides, but as you can tell, we can still talk a lot with very few slides. Our specific recipient recommendations, like I said earlier, are our real recommendations. We went to actual OIG reports. As Suhaila mentioned, we really wanted to highlight the differences between recipient recommendations and what they're called: question cost, unallowable cost, and unsupported cost. All three of these can happen, and they are all three different things. Probably the easiest type of costs to talk about are question costs, because those costs are those that could be either unreasonable or are not in line with the program. Question costs because they aren't in line with the program and they could appear to be violations of your terms and condition, like Suhaila said earlier about prior approval being a requirement, but it wasn't received. An example could be that you didn't request prior approval for the cost prior to incurring it. Certain items within the financial guide require prior approval. And from the formula perspective, this is a little bit different because you don't get budgets approved. But for the state coalitions, if you have a consultant that is more than the prior approval thresholds of the 81.25 an hour or the 650 a day rates, it could become a question cost. The cost may not be in line with your policies and procedures, or the documentation doesn't align with the expense that's reported in your general ledger. And that's probably one of the things we see more often, is that the documentation was supported for a travel reimbursement. And I kind of talked about this earlier. And I reviewed one a couple months ago for a closeout. They reported $600 for a hotel. The receipt was for $600. So the charge and the receipt matched what was in their general ledger, but the actual conference was only for 2 days. and they charged our grant for 4 days of the hotel. So the question cost was because they were charging the OVW grant program for the entire length of the stay when they should have only been charging it for the time period of that conference. So it was a question cost, and they ended up having to pay the difference back to OVW. Unsupported costs. This is in line with documentation. This is where we always tell recipients to document, and document some more. Because if you don't have the source documentation, how is there a way to know that it's in line with your policies and procedure, in line with the program goals and objectives? So having that documentation is better to have it than not to have it. Because how are you going to get it after the fact? So it could be an unsupported cost. Unallowable costs are completely in violation of either program requirements or federal statute. There are certain things within federal guidelines, within the uniform guidance, like lobbying, that are unallowable. That is completely unallowable to be charged to a federal grant program. If you have lobbying costs in your budget, we're going to tell you you have to remove those costs. But if then you charge it to the grant program, you're going to have to return those funds. That is flat out unallowable. There was one recipient that had an Office of Inspector General audit currently that we're trying to resolve. They had fundraising costs that were identified by the OIG audit. There's no question around that. It's 100% unallowable, and they have to return it. So we are working through the process of getting them to return those funds. So these are 3 types of recommendations: are either your costs being classified as questioned, unsupported, or unallowable. But these only pertain to the costs related to the findings within the audit, because there could be other types of finding. It could be programmatic, it could be related to policies and procedures, but we just wanted to highlight the recipient recommendation piece to explain in more detail the differences between the types of cost. Documentation. This goes back to the conversation we were having earlier related to documentation submitted by your subrecipient. Based on your monitoring and review of them pre-award, making sure that it's complete and accurate and that it's in accordance with what you impose on your subrecipient to be able to receive reimbursement request. You have to enforce your monitoring policy procedures on your subrecipient. This is an actual recommendation. The documentation that was submitted by a subrecipient did not appear to be complete and accurate in accordance with their own subrecipient policies and procedures. They did not monitor their subrecipients in line with their own internal policies and procedures. If you have internal policies and procedures, you not only have to have them, they have to be written, but then you then have to follow and be in line with them. Because if they don't meet the needs of your organization, you need to change them. You need to update those policies and procedures so you're in line with them. You have to, as a direct recipient, remember that our relationship is with you. Your relationship is with your subrecipients. If you're subbing out your award in terms of, potentially with the coalitions, you need to make sure that your subrecipients are following all of the applicable federal requirements that we impose on you, and you have to implement them. These are some of the things that we say to them, but you have to do. You have to have a process in place to monitor your subrecipients. You have to follow that policy and procedure to monitor your subrecipients. And what kind of documentation are you requesting of your subrecipients to get reimbursement? And what level of detail do you need? Melissa and I have had conversations about this. And like I said before, about getting all of the source documentation up front. That puts a big burden potentially on your subrecipient. But how did you rate them in their pre-award risk assessment? That plays a big part, and it's a requirement of the uniform guidance. So, this was one of the recipient recommendations. That particular recommendation was actually cited in an Office of Inspector General recap where they spelled out the bigger findings throughout the entire department. I think this grantee had over $2 million in subrecipient funding pass through that they didn't monitor. That's huge. You need to monitor. And the way you monitor them or the type of monitoring is, it needs to be in line with your policies and procedures. So, we're working with this recipient to increase their internal policies and procedures to include more of what they need to do. But then they have to be the ones to actually implement it. And this particular recipient, someone brought this to our attention last week because they wanted to make a system change. I read the recommendation and I said, this isn't a responsibility of the federal government to collect this data. It's our responsibility to monitor them to make sure that they have the policies and procedures, work with them, provide technical assistance. This was actually talked about and recommended in their financial monitor. So, not only did they get a financial monitoring visit that said the exact same finding, but they also got an Office of Inspector General audit that said the same finding. So, this goes back to, although they're called two different things, they're looking at the exact same thing. So, Suhaila, I feel like we're getting a lot of questions.
Yeah, we are.
I don't want to go into the next slide if there are a lot of questions that may pertain to this conversation or an overall question.
So this is Suhaila. It was actually from the last slide when you mentioned about hotel fees that were for 4 days versus two. It was that situation. We did have some questions from Hawaii and from outside the contiguous United States, and they were asking about would that be okay for them to incur longer hotel stays? They're coming from very far away and having to adjust to time zone differences, sometimes 12 hours difference. Having personally been to Guam, I know how hard it is to have to adjust that quickly in such a short time frame. So I just wanted to say the example Aaron gave was nothing to do with the situation for our grantees who are traveling from outside the United States from this area. That was specifically for a situation where somebody was either doing personal travel at that same time or visiting another conference that had nothing to do with our grant. Somebody else mentioned that sometimes there are instances with bad weather and flight delays, and that happens too. You just need to follow your internal policies and procedures for travel to make sure that that's documented for why you had to incur that additional hotel days. If that happens and you're following your policies for that, then that justification, whether it's putting a memo in your travel authorization and voucher package, that's in there, then the auditor would see that and they'd say, okay, this looks fine, and you're good to go. So then we got one more question that I haven't read yet, but I can read it out loud. Our subrecipients are required to provide proof of payments, like a bank statement for expenses before they can be reimbursed. Can you share what the expectation is for expenses that are charged on a credit card? Should we be requesting credit card statements as well and proof that they're paying the credit card bill each month? So I think this goes under that same category Aaron was talking about earlier. Like what type of documentation, if any, is required from your subrecipients before you issue them their reimbursements? So I personally am not sure what the specific bank statements would demonstrate versus a credit card. It's not something that we require you to review, I feel like if you're reviewing something, it might make more sense to look at their supporting documentation rather than their bank statement. There's a lot of different ways you can do your due diligence.
This is Erin speaking. The only thing I wanted to add is the Office on Violence Against Women does not use credit card statement as proof of documentation. So that in itself isn't going to show you that the cost was a cost that should be charged to our grant program. So that was the only thing I wanted to add because everything else you said.
This is Suhaila. Yeah, it sounds like if you're trying to see what's going on before you reimburse them, then maybe more of the supporting documentation rather than a bank statement, just because that'll have a bit more detail. But again, you're not required to, and I'm not saying that you have to. Okay, I'm sorry, there was a clarification. They said that they do require the actual invoice or receipt, but also want to see that they actually paid the bill. Thank you, Megan.
This is Erin speaking. Also, I'm trying to think of a like a reasonable, prudent person test of how much documentation is really necessary. I'm going to go on record and say that our responsibility from, a staff administrative potentially is to one, make sure that the cost is allowable. Two, make sure the cost is reasonable and necessary to complete the grant program and that it's allocable. All of these things have to be true to be able to reimburse it. I don't think you should have to then make sure that they're paying their bill. That's on them. I think that might just be putting more responsibility on you. That is just my opinion. Suhaila, I don't know if you want to add to this because we don't ask you if you're paying your bills. We ask for the documentation to support the cost.
This is Suhaila. I think that, and we're going to talk about this a bit more in our regular new grantee orientation presentation. It's all going to come back to the pre-award risk assessment that you perform and whether or not you assessed that these additional steps were even necessary. So maybe just taking one step back, looking to see what you're finding, what you are finding after you assessed any potential risk that they may pose, and then seeing, okay, it looks like based on how they're describing their policies, describing their accounting systems, their different accounting procedures, it appears that they're able to manage this. So maybe we won't have as many restrictions or requirements or reimbursement. Or if they didn't make you feel comfortable about how they responded to the questions, then you would put those additional restrictions on them. So I think that to answer this question about what you should be doing, let's just refer back to the risk assessment that you performed and how they responded to it. And do you need to maybe make that process more robust so that you can have that better understanding up front? Because maybe you're doing more work than you need to, requiring all of this documentation throughout the life of the grant. So, just a thought.
This is Erin speaking. We don't want to say no, you don't have to collect any documentation before you reimburse recipients or subrecipients. We're not saying that at all. It's in, like Suhalis and I said earlier, of identifying that risk of your subrecipients and the level of monitoring, as well as the level of reimbursement request you might need for that particular organization. Your policies and procedures will drive that. But I will say, when you actually go on site to monitor, you have to play into that part too. So if you're never going to be able to go on site to monitor a subrecipient, is that monitoring really the reimbursement process? So that also plays a part in your reimbursement. Are your reimbursed recipients, do they have internal policies and procedures over monitoring? you say you will review all of the documentation or a sample of the documentation XYZ amount of times over the length of the award. So you have to take all of that into consideration.
This is Suhaila speaking. So we did get one other question, and then I believe we might be all up to date, which is, are we going to talk more about the risk assessment process during this course? And I think that we'll talk more about that during the regular new grantee orientation presentation that we have. And also, I will put in the chat box the link to the guidance where you can find out more in the meantime, just in case you're, looking for some light reading. But we will definitely cover this in our regular presentation. Thank you for that question.
This is Erin speaking. Yeah, and I think it's in specifically, Suhaila, in the pass-through presentation. We've touched on it in our regular one, but there's a more in-depth presentation where Marnie joins us, I believe, and we get into a little bit more of that in relation to our interpretation of the uniform guidance. I'm really enjoying this conversation. This is very awesome. I appreciate it. And this is kind of what Suhaila and I had envisioned. So thank you. I will go to the next recommendation that we pulled up, and maybe it will bring some more conversation. The recommendation for this grantee was they needed to develop and implement formal written policies and procedures to ensure that sub-recipient agreements contained proper elements and that they were conducting adequate oversight and monitoring as outlined in the Department of Justice Financial Guide. And this particular recommendation was about the subrecipient agreement. The uniform guidance, when it was updated, added a bunch of things that needed to be documented in the subrecipient award letter. I'll say award agreement or subrecipient agreement. We'll speak more to that as well in the pass through piece of it, but they didn't have all of the required uniform guidance pieces on all of their award documents. It's a grant agreement with the subrecipient. The policies and the award conditions, were they outlined? Was the federal funding identifier included? Did the subrecipient know what federal awards they were receiving funding from? Especially for multiple levels of funding, is it outlined on the document? The period of performance, was that outlined for each individual funding streams, especially those with multiple years of funding? And they weren't monitoring in line with their own internal policies and procedures and what was listed in the financial guide. So, one of the things that we have been talking to them about is their pre award risk assessment. And Suhaila highlighted this a little bit about the risk assessment that the Office on Violence Against Women does on all of our applicants. We review those 11 questions. That plays a part in our risk assessment. We're looking to make sure that you are current in submitting all your required reports, whether it be your single audit to the Federal Audit Clearinghouse, whether it's your federal financial reports or your progress reports. These are all ways to assess the ability to manage a federal award. Are you current in SAM.gov? The pre-award risk assessment is a type of assessment completed to determine the type and level of monitoring. Because your monitoring policy and procedure can look different for each type of subrecipient, the level of monitoring may be different if the recipient has a high, medium, or low risk. It could be completely different for all three of those identified risks. I talked a little bit about the requirements of the subaward documentation. If the subaward documentation does not include all of the required information that's listed in the uniform guidance, that's going to be a finding and you need to update it because your subrecipient should have all of the pertinent information they need to be able to implement their program, as well as report to you as the direct recipient because you have to report those costs. So these are just some of the findings we're working with this particular recipient to help resolve. Does anyone have any questions related to that? So this is one of the recommendations that we're currently working on, and this is what we would do with them in developing their internal policies and procedures, and then making sure they are implementing them. Suhaila, were there any questions?
This is Suhaila speaking. Here's a question. Do you provide an example of policies and procedures for coalitions? So we don't have a full set of policies and procedures that we recommend or have samples for. We have a couple of like timesheet samples and some excerpts from travel policies. But what I do recommend is if you want to contact your TA provider and see if they can put you in touch with another coalition that is of a similar size as yours, if they're composed similarly to your organization, maybe they can help mentor you a little bit on what theirs looks like. I think that this was it for questions, but I just want to say that I'm putting in the chat box a reference to the uniform guidance and the requirements for pass-through entities where they talk about assessing risk. But also, I'm putting in here the Federal Awarding Agency review of risk posed by applicants. And that is the set of regulations that are imposed on us as federal funders. It goes into good detail on what we look at when we assess risk. It might just be some helpful guidance for you if you want to read through that.
This is Erin speaking. Thank you, Suhaila. And I actually want to read one of the comments in there, and you may have read it. I apologize if I'm repeating it. But one of the recipients said they don't ask their subs for their bank statements, but we in our membership have been asked to provide them for other grants. And it causes a hardship for them and other recipients to get reimbursed because they don't always get their mail. They don't always cash the check to get it to show on the bank statement, etc. And it could cause too many delays in reimbursing your subrecipient. I think that's a really huge thing to point out, but you have to think about the burden you're putting on some of these small victim service providers, potentially in terms of what type of documentation you're requesting. But remember, it goes back to the risk you assessed pre-award. And that's why, you can kind of increase that level of review. Melissa, did you want to add something to that?
I did, Erin. Thank you. So this is Melissa, and I'm a program manager and team lead on the Formula team. And I'd like to take a moment to put into program manager words what you've been saying about the risk assessment. When you conduct this risk assessment, you identify organizations that may be at more risk. This then helps you apply different levels of review based on that risk assessment. For example, for those organizations that have previously been recipients or subrecipients, or maybe received a monitoring visit from OVW and show they are consistent and reliable, then your level of scrutiny on a routine basis can be less intense. Whereas a newly funded organization or an organization with a history of financial issues may have a higher level of scrutiny for a given period of time. These differing levels of scrutiny help you manage your time by focusing on organizations that you've determined to be at higher risk. Did I get that right?
100%. This is Erin speaking. I love the way that you put that into a programmatic perspective because it makes it relatable. And Suhaila and I, we speak from that financial perspective and how we want that documentation. But I appreciate the different perspectives so that there might not be anyone who's financial on our call today, but that you put it into a real life experience. The next recommendation is the the recipient should enhance its accounting system and accounting policies and procedures to ensure that it maintains complete and accurate accounting records for your awards. So part of the requirements of the uniform guidance is you need to be able to track and separate out all different levels and sources of funding. We don't require separate bank accounts. We don't require a certain accounting system, but your accounting records need to be able to separately account for all types of funding stream. And when I say that, I'm saying it in a sense of if I were to come and monitor you, and I'm going to speak from a coalition perspective, I want you to provide me your general ledger or your state coalition award. You may get other funding from the state or STOP or SAS. You may get pass-through funding. You might have direct discretionary grant programs, but I only want to see the general ledger associated with your state coalition award. So you would then need to have the ability to go into your accounting system and pull just the expenditures that are related to that state coalition award. And that's generally done by codes. Your different accounting codes account for different streams of funding. So we would work with our recipients in terms of how your accounting system is set up. Why did the auditor or the Office of Inspector General note that you didn't have an accounting system to provide a complete and accurate accounting record for us to be able to review? This could be an issue because your accounting records aren't going to be accurate for your financial reports. How are you submitting your federal financial reports if your accounting records or your general ledger aren't accurate? So we would work with you on making sure that you have strong policies and procedures to be able to accurately report, or you might have to get a different type of accounting system to be able to track it. These are just some of the additional things in a recommendation in one of our current audits that we're doing. Because at the end of the day, you need to be able to provide us documentation to support expenses just for the State Coalition Award or STOP or SAS award. You should be able to go into your general ledger and pull down a detailed expenditure report specifically for the OVW grant program. The next recommendation is, remedy the unsupported costs for excess funds drawn. If you go back to the first slide where we talked about the 3 different types of cost, the unsupported costs, there wasn't documentation to support that you had an expense. You're reporting on your federal financial report $100,000, but you might only have $90,000 of source documentation or expenditures in your general ledger. Where is that additional $10,000? There's no support to show that cost should be charged to the OVW grant program. How are you drawing down those funds? What do your policies and procedures state for drawing down those funds? We have some grantees that draw down on a biweekly basis, and there are some that draw down quarterly. Remember, this is all dependent on the organization and their need. Remember that your documentation should always support the funds drawn down from our system and in line with your internal accounting record. And always remember that grant programs are on a reimbursement basis only. So we ask that you only draw down funds based on your need because every organization is different and the cash flow is different. Dependent on the type of organization, you may need to draw down more frequently. And I do recommend from a STOP or SAS perspective, if you have sub-recipients, taking that into consideration as well as when you're reimbursing your sub-recipients. Some of these small nonprofits and victim service providers can't go months and months and months without getting reimbursed. So take that into consideration in your monitoring process, your reimbursement process, because they aren't able to just draw down directly from the Office on Violence Against Women. They have to go to you for the process and get it reviewed and then get reimbursed from the direct recipient. This next recommendation is about this recipient not having policies and procedures to submit their federal financial reports on time and to know what documentation was to be used to submit those expenditures. So you're reporting your federal financial reports on a quarterly basis. Pre-Just Grants, they were done based on a quarterly expenditures, but we've gone away from that. It's now all cumulative expenditures. So you need to have a policy in place to show that you're pulling from your accounting records on a cumulative basis because you want to be able to report all of the expenditures related to your OVW grant program. You want to make sure you have strong internal controls in place, that the documentation you're pulling from with your accounting records actually matches what's being submitted in the Just Grant system. And for instance, for match, you want to make sure you're accounting for all of your match funds and making sure that they are being reported on your final federal financial report. Because remember, you're required to match 25% of your award. To exclude subawards to victim service providers providing victim services and tribes, but you have to have the documentation to support them, as well as make sure that it's documented in your accounting record so that you are able to accurately reflect it on your quarterly or your final federal financial report. I did get a direct message about something 2 slides ago about what's a reasonable amount of time for reimbursement. From a federal perspective, I can't take a specific position on you have to reimburse every month or you have to reimburse every 2 weeks. I can't speak to that. But you again need to have conversations with your subrecipients because a lot of grantees or subrecipients can't float for months on end. We've had conversations with subrecipients, not only subrecipients, but they are direct recipients to us about not getting reimbursed for 3 months. And they don't have that cash flow. This can be part of your pre-award risk assessment. This also needs to be documented in your policies and procedures for monitoring, as well as reimbursing your subrecipients. I know that's an auditor way of answering it without giving you the answer, but this needs to be an internal conversation on staff ability to review those reimbursements. This might also play a part in the amount of source documentation that you're requesting. It all ties back to your policies and procedures, your pre-award risk assessment that you do on your subrecipient. That all plays a part. If you have specific questions, I would recommend talking to other agencies who are doing this. That is probably going to get you some of the best practices. Talk to each other. You are your best resources. You're doing the same type of work. Talk to your technical assistance providers, especially from a state coalition perspective. Work with them. Now, this next slide recommendation is to develop and implement policies and procedures for tracking and documenting performance measure data to ensure progress reports are accurately and properly supported. So these reports show us that all the work that you're doing as a direct recipient are in line with the purpose areas of the grant for which you're awarded. And we are required as an office to report all performance data to Congress. So all of the information that you are submitting in for your reports, quarterly or your final, must tie to the goals and objectives of your grant program. And also remembering that program activities do tie to the financial cost of the grant programs. Strong policies and procedures related to ensuring performance measure is properly supported is to ensure accuracy of reported number of victims served, number of law enforcement staff trained, support the recipient's mandatory allocation per the program solicitation. Remember, as part of your solicitation for STOP, you have to adhere to a certain allocation for certain purpose areas. And you have to be able to support the coalition's reporting data. Suhaila, I think this is our last slide, and I don't believe we have any other questions. So thank you all for taking the time with us today. And remember, if you have any questions for us, you can please reach out to the Grants Financial Management Division, either send us an email or give us a call. Thank you.